It was December 19th, 4 days before Christmas bonuses dropped. I sat in the glass-walled conference room on the 7th floor, watching Mark Dempsey arrange papers on the table like he was preparing evidence for a trial. The VP of Finance had called me in without explanation, and the fluorescent lights made everything feel cold and surgical. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Emily, your position's been eliminated," he said, sliding a termination letter across the table. I stared at the words, my brain refusing to process them. My bonus, the one I'd worked all year for, disappeared in an instant. But as Mark leaned back with that familiar smirk, something caught my eye. His laptop screen, angled just slightly toward me, showed a single folder still open. The file name read, Bonus Under Adjustments, Anal Facts. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face blank. I signed the letter without arguing, stood up, and walked out. Behind me, I heard him exhale like he'd just finished an easy task. 6 months earlier, everything had been different. My team had just closed the best quarter in company history. Revenue was up 32%, audit errors were down to almost zero, and the executive team couldn't stop talking about our success. Mark stood in front of everyone during the quarterly meeting, gesturing toward me with pride. "Emily is the backbone of this finance department," he announced, his voice booming across the conference hall. People clapped, and I felt a surge of validation. I'd worked late nights, skipped weekends, and corrected hundreds of reports to earn that praise. For the first time in 3 years, I believed I'd finally earned his trust. After the meeting, executives shook my hand. The CFO even mentioned a possible promotion. I walked back to my desk feeling lighter than I had in months. Maybe loyalty actually mattered here. Maybe hard work was finally paying off. A week later, I was grabbing coffee in the break room when I heard Mark's voice around the corner. He was talking to another VP, his tone casual and careless. "Emily's good at her job, sure," he said with a laugh, "but she's replaceable." "They all are." I froze, coffee cup halfway to my mouth. The words hit me like cold water. Replaceable. After everything I'd done, that's how he saw me. I stood there, hidden by the vending machine, listening to him joke about how easy it is to keep people motivated with a little praise. My hands shook as I walked back to my desk. The praise from last week suddenly felt hollow, like a trick I'd fallen for. I opened my laptop and stared at the spreadsheets on my screen, but I couldn't focus. Something in me shifted that day. I started paying closer attention to everything Mark said and did. 2 weeks later, Mark reassigned me. "We need someone detail-oriented for audit preparation," he explained, handing me a stack of old expense reports. It was tedious work that nobody wanted, the kind of task meant to bury people. I was pulled off active projects and stuck reviewing months of outdated vendor invoices and payment records. At first, I thought it was temporary, but days turned into weeks, and I was still sitting at my desk, combing through endless rows of data. Then I started noticing things. Small discrepancies. Invoices that didn't match the amounts in our system. Payments approved without proper documentation. First, I thought they were honest mistakes. But the more I dug, the more I realized they all had something in common. Every single one traced back to accounts that Mark had personally approved. My pulse quickened. This wasn't random. This was a pattern. I printed a few examples and brought them to Mark's office the next morning. He was leaning back in his chair, scrolling through his phone when I knocked. "Mark, I found some inconsistencies in the expense reports," I said, placing the papers on his desk. He barely glanced at them. "You're seeing ghosts, Emily," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "These old files always have quirks. Just focus on your own reports." But I persisted. "These payments don't have matching vendor invoices. They're all flagged under your approvals." His expression hardened. "Are you questioning my judgment?" The room felt smaller suddenly. "No, I just thought." "Then stop wasting time," he interrupted. "Focus on what you're assigned to do." I left his office feeling uneasy. Over the next few weeks, my workload doubled. Ideas I shared in meetings were suddenly credited to others. I was being erased slowly and deliberately. One afternoon, my mentor in HR, a woman named Paula, pulled me aside in the hallway. She looked around nervously before speaking. "Emily, be careful," she whispered. "Mark's setting someone up. I don't know who, but I've seen this before." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "Just watch your back. Document everything. And don't trust him." She walked away before I could ask more questions. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed every interaction with Mark, every reassignment, every dismissal. The pattern was clear now. He wasn't just sidelining me. He was building a case against me. I started keeping copies of every email, every report, every comment. I backed up my files to a personal cloud folder I'd set up months ago and forgotten about. If he was planning something, I needed to be ready. But I didn't realize how soon it would happen. 2 weeks later, HR called me in. I sat across from a stone-faced woman named Brenda, who opened a folder and slid a printed report toward me. "Emily, we've received concerns about data mismanagement on your part," she said, her tone formal and detached. I stared at the report, my heart pounding. "What are you talking about? My reports are clean. There are discrepancies in the files you handled. We're suggesting you take some time off while we review this." I felt the ground shift beneath me. This was the setup Paula had warned me about. "I haven't mismanaged anything," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Then the review will clear you," Brenda replied, but her eyes said otherwise. I left HR in a daze, walked back to my desk and started packing my things. From across the office, I saw Mark watching from his window, a faint smile on his face. He thought he'd won. At home, I collapsed on my couch, shame and confusion swirling inside me. How had it come to this? I replayed every conversation, every decision, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I hadn't done anything wrong. Mark had cornered me, quietly and methodically. Then I remembered something. Every audit file I'd handled was automatically synced to my personal cloud backup. I'd set it up months ago as a precaution, then forgotten about it. I grabbed my laptop and logged in. There it was. 6 months worth of data trails, version histories, timestamps. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the folders. Among them was one file labeled, Expense and Adjustments of July. Opened it. The edits were all there, timestamped and tagged with Mark's user ID. He'd altered approval amounts, rerouted payments, and covered his tracks. Or so he thought. I logged into the company system the next morning. My access hadn't been revoked yet. I navigated to the same expense files I'd flagged weeks ago. They were gone. Completely wiped from the server. My breath caught. He'd deleted them. A notification popped up at the bottom of my screen. Access revoked by M. Dempsey. I stared at the message, my pulse racing. Mark had personally erased the evidence. But he didn't know I had copies. Clean, time-stamped, unedited copies. I logged out and closed my laptop slowly, my mind racing. He thought he'd buried me. Instead, he just handed me the proof I needed. I spent the rest of the day organizing everything into a secure folder. I wasn't going to act impulsively. I was going to be smart, methodical, and patient. Mark had taught me one thing. Timing was everything. Few days later, I started applying for jobs. Quietly. No announcements, no social media posts. Just clean applications to firms that valued integrity. During one interview, the CFO of a rival company leaned back in his chair and said something that made my stomach drop. "Funny timing," he remarked. "We just hired someone else from your company. He mentioned some accounting issues over there." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, alarms were going off. Mark was already spreading a narrative. Planting seeds. Making sure that if anyone asked questions, I'd look like the problem. I thanked the CFO for his time and left the building, my resolve hardening. Mark wasn't just covering his tracks. He was actively destroying my reputation. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make sure the truth came out. I reconnected with a former coworker named Jason, who'd left the company abruptly 6 months earlier. We met for coffee, and he looked relieved to see me. "I heard what happened," he said. "Mark did the same thing to me." My eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "He forced me out after I questioned some budget reallocations. He made it look like I was the problem, then had me escorted out within a week." Jason pulled out his phone and showed me old email threads. They matched the suspicious transactions I'd found. Payments that didn't add up. Approvals that bypassed standard protocols. All under Mark's authorization. "I kept everything," Jason said. "I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew something wasn't right." I felt a surge of clarity. I wasn't alone. Mark had done this before. And now I had proof from multiple sources. Over the next week I played it cool. I sent Mark friendly messages, pretending to accept the situation. "Thanks for the opportunity to work with you," I wrote in one email. "I understand the company's direction." He responded quickly, his tone suddenly warm. "You're a professional, Emily. I respect that." He thought I'd given up. Meanwhile, I was compiling a clean, chronological audit trail of every altered document, every deleted file, every suspicious payment. I organized everything by date, cross-referenced it with Jason's emails, and backed it up in 3 separate locations. I wasn't rushing. I was building a case that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. By the end of the week, I had a timeline that spanned 18 months. It was airtight, and it all pointed directly to Mark. Then I got the email. An anonymous coworker forwarded me the internal memo. The executive bonus allocations for the year. I opened it with shaking hands. Mark's bonus had tripled. 3 times what he'd received the previous year. The memo included a breakdown. His cost-saving measures, including multiple layoffs and position eliminations, had directly funded the executive bonuses. My position, my bonus, my livelihood, all sacrificed to pad his payout. I stared at the screen, rage boiling beneath my calm exterior. He hadn't just fired me to cover his fraud. He'd fired me to increase his bonus. Every late night I'd worked, every weekend I'd sacrificed, every success I'd delivered had been turned into profit for him. I saved the memo, added it to my growing file, and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone he'd hurt. A few days later, I received a call from HR. They wanted to schedule a final exit interview. I agreed, keeping my tone polite and cooperative. During the meeting, I asked Brenda for a final payroll confirmation, just to make sure everything was processed correctly. She seemed surprised by the request but agreed. "We'll need to reprocess the payroll spreadsheet," she said. "It'll take a day or 2. I nodded, thanking her for her help. What Brenda didn't know was that reprocessing the payroll file would pull data from the backup servers. The same servers where Mark's deleted files still existed in archived form. I left HR with a calm smile, knowing I'd just triggered the recovery of the very evidence Mark thought he'd erased. Sometimes the system works for you if you know how to use it. 2 days later, I received a notification. The payroll reprocess was complete. I logged into my personal archive and checked the recovered file. There it was. Hidden in the spreadsheet was a formula buried deep in the code. It diverted bonus payouts into a separate column labeled Executive Adjustments. The formula was tied to Mark's unique login ID. The timestamp matched the week before my termination. He'd manually adjusted the bonus structure to funnel money from eliminated positions directly into executive payouts. It was right there in black and white. Undeniable. I sat back, staring at my screen, feeling a strange calm settle over me. I had him. Not with accusations or theories. With facts. With data. With proof that couldn't be argued away. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. I went back to HR one last time. I walked into Brenda's office with a folder in hand and placed it on her desk. "I found something during the payroll review," I said calmly. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Emily, you're no longer an employee. This isn't your responsibility." Smiled. You're right. But the audit trail isn't yours anymore either. I placed a copy of my signed termination letter on top of the folder. This proves my discovery came after my employment ended. I'm not bound by any confidentiality agreements regarding fraud. Brenda's face went pale. What are you saying? I'm saying you have 48 hours to address this internally before I take it to the board of directors. I stood up, thanked her for her time and walked out. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. For the first time in months I felt powerful. That night, I drafted a detailed report to the company's board of directors. I kept it factual, unemotional, and supported by timestamps, metadata, and cross-referenced logs. I outlined the pattern of altered expense reports, the deleted files, the hidden bonus formula, and the timeline of my termination. I included Jason's supporting emails and the recovered payroll data. At the end, I added a single line. For verification, please review the automated audit trail on backup servers. The logs are immutable. I didn't send it yet. I wanted to give HR the chance to act first. Not because I trusted them, but because I wanted them to know I'd given them the opportunity. If they ignored it, the board would know they'd been warned. I saved the draft and set a reminder for 48 hours. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in weeks. 2 days later my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times that morning. Each time I ignored it. Finally I listened to the message. His voice was frantic, strained, nothing like the confident VP I'd known. Emily, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Please call me back. I deleted the message. An hour later my old colleague texted me. Mark's been in meetings all morning. People are panicking. What did you do? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The wheels were already in motion. By lunchtime, I received an email from the board's audit committee requesting a meeting. I replied immediately, confirming my availability. The meeting was set for the following Monday. Mark's 48 hours were up. And so was his time. The following week, an independent audit firm arrived at the company. Whispers flooded LinkedIn. Current employees posted vague updates about internal reviews and leadership changes. The company issued a press release. We are conducting an internal review of executive bonus structures to ensure compliance with company policy. Mark's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. He tried to control the narrative, posting on LinkedIn about transparency and accountability. In a staff meeting, he blamed the situation on a former disgruntled analyst who misunderstood standard procedures. But the damage was done. The auditors had access to everything now. The backup servers, the timestamps, the formula, and they had my report, which outlined every piece of evidence in clear, undeniable detail. Mark's version of events didn't matter anymore. The data spoke louder than he ever could. I never leaked anything myself. But within days, an anonymous post appeared on a corporate watchdog forum. It included redacted portions of the audit trail I'd compiled, along with a breakdown of the bonus adjustments. The post didn't name Mark directly, but it didn't have to. The connections were obvious. Business news outlets picked it up within hours. Executive bonus fraud allegations rock regional firm. One headline read. Mark's face was suddenly everywhere, tied to words like investigation and misconduct. The company's stock dropped 6% overnight. Investors demanded answers. Employees began speaking out, sharing their own stories of being pressured, sidelined, or forced out. The floodgates had opened, and Mark was drowning in the current. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my apartment, feeling strangely detached. This wasn't revenge. This was just the truth, finally being heard. Mark was suspended pending the investigation. His LinkedIn profile went dark. His name disappeared from the company website. Former colleagues reached out to me privately, thanking me for speaking up. Some apologized for not doing it themselves. One message stood out. It was from the CEO himself, requesting a private meeting. I agreed, curious about what he wanted. We met at a coffee shop downtown. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "Emily, I owe you an apology," he began. "We were blind to what Mark was doing. Your integrity exposed a rot we didn't want to see." I listened, saying nothing. "We'd like to offer you a consulting contract," he continued. "Help us rebuild our compliance systems. Make sure this never happens again." I considered it carefully. Part of me wanted to walk away entirely, but another part wanted to see real change happen. A week later, the investigation concluded. Mark was officially terminated for ethics violations. The company issued a public statement acknowledging serious misconduct and announcing new oversight measures. Mark's bonus was clawed back in full. He was required to repay over $200,000. His professional reputation was destroyed. Recruiters I knew said he'd been blacklisted from major firms across the state. His career, built on manipulation and fraud, collapsed in less than a month. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, just relief that the truth had been heard. Justice didn't feel like victory, felt like balance being restored, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had my integrity back, and that mattered more than any bonus ever could have. Mark had tried to erase me. Instead, he'd erased himself. I accepted the CEO's consulting offer, but only on my terms. Triple my old salary, a 6-month contract with the option to extend, and full authority to implement changes without interference. They agreed to everything. My new office overlooked the same skyline I used to stare at during those sleepless nights after my termination. But now the view looked different, brighter, full of possibility instead of fear. I spent my first week interviewing employees, listening to their concerns, and mapping out a new compliance framework. People were hungry for change. They wanted to trust their leadership again, and I was going to help them build a system that earned that trust. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing work that mattered. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd been silenced before. One morning, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Please, can we talk?" It was from Mark. I stared at it for a long moment, my cursor hovering over the delete button. Then I did something better. I forwarded the email to HR with a single line, "For record-keeping purposes." Then I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and took a deep breath. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need closure from him. I'd already found it in the work I was doing, in the changes I was making, in the knowledge that I'd stood up when it mattered. Mark had tried to delete the evidence. But integrity can't be erased, can only be exposed. And once it's out in the open, it changes everything. That afternoon, I packed up my things and headed home early. The sun was setting over the city, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. I walked slowly, letting the moment settle over me. Peaceful, powerful, untouchable. Mark had tried to bury me, and for a while I'd believed he could. But he'd underestimated one thing. The truth doesn't disappear just because someone deletes a file. It lives in backups, in timestamps, in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. And when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't just expose the fraud. It reveals who people really are. I'd learned that the hard way. But I'd also learned something else. You don't need revenge when you have the truth. You just need the courage to share it. I whispered to myself as I walked. You don't delete integrity. You just expose it. And I kept walking, leaving the past behind me one step at a time.